My dad passed away last year and left me the family farm. It had been in our family for generations, but my father had let it fall into disrepair in his later years. My plan was to bring it back to life, to make it a working farm again. I drove out there, full of hope and ambition, ready to start the next chapter of my life. But when I got to the main access road, my heart sank. A brand new, fancy-looking gate stood in my way, adorned with a big, bold sign, "Private property, no trespassing, property of the Meadowlands Homeowners Association." I was confused. This road had always been the main entrance to our farm. I got out of my truck and looked around. The new housing development next door, the one my dad always complained about, had apparently decided this road belonged to them. I called the number on the sign, and a very smug-sounding woman answered. She introduced herself as Karen, the president of the HOA. I explained who I was and that this was the road to my farm. She laughed. She told me that the road was now part of their private community and that I'd have to find another way in. Another way in. The only other access was a treacherous, overgrown dirt track that was barely passable with a four-wheel drive, let alone farm equipment. I tried to reason with her, but she was having none of it. She said my dirty farm was an eyesore and that they didn't want my tractors tearing up their private road. The call ended with her threatening to have my truck towed if I didn't leave immediately. I was furious. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a declaration of war. They were trying to choke my farm out of existence before I even had a chance to start. I knew I couldn't let this happen. This was my legacy, my inheritance. I wasn't going to be bullied by some power-tripping suburban committee. This meant more to me than they could ever understand. The fight for my farm had just begun. My next step was to confront the HOA in person. I found out they were having their monthly meeting in the community clubhouse, a building that looked more like a country club than a neighborhood center. I walked in, and the conversation immediately stopped. About a dozen pairs of eyes stared at me, a mix of curiosity and hostility. I saw the woman I presumed was Karen sitting at the head of the table, looking like a queen holding court. I introduced myself again and calmly stated my case. I explained that the road was the only viable access to my property and that it had been used by my family for over a century. Karen just smiled that same smug smile. She claimed their developers had purchased the land, including the road, and that the official plat maps proved it. One of the other board members, a man who looked like he'd never done a day of manual labor in his life, chimed in. He said, "We've invested a lot of money to make this a beautiful, exclusive community. We can't have muddy tractors and farm smells ruining the ambience." The ambience. I was trying to run a business, to continue a family tradition, and they were worried about ambience. The meeting quickly devolved into a shouting match. They called me a trespasser. I called them land thieves. They threatened legal action. I told them to bring it on. It was clear that talking was useless. These people were unreasonable. They had built their little kingdom and saw my farm as a blight on their perfect world. They didn't see the history or the heritage. They just saw dirt and an obstacle to their inflated property values. I left that meeting more determined than ever. If they wanted to play hardball, then so could I. They had their fancy maps and their lawyers, but I had something they didn't, the truth, and I was going to dig it up, no matter how deep it was buried. I knew that arguing with the HOA was a dead end. The only way to win this was with cold, hard facts. My dad, God rest his soul, was a bit of a pack rat. He never threw anything away. I started in the old farmhouse attic, a dusty time capsule filled with generations of forgotten treasures. I spent days, which turned into weeks, sifting through boxes of old papers. I found letters from my great-great-grandfather, old family photos, and report cards from the 1930s. It was a journey through my family's history, but I was on a mission. I needed deeds, surveys, and county records. After countless hours of searching, covered in dust and cobwebs, I finally found it. It was a thick leather-bound folder tucked away in an old trunk. Inside were the original deeds to the farm, dating back to the late 1800s. There were hand-drawn maps and official-looking documents with wax seals. I carefully laid them out on the old dining room table, and there it was, clear as day. A document from 1925, when the county was formalizing a lot of the rural roads, showed a legal easement granting our property permanent and unrestricted access via that specific road. It wasn't just a track we used. It was legally part of our property's access rights. The road didn't belong to the HOA. It never had. The developers who built the new subdivision had either overlooked this or, more likely, deliberately ignored it, hoping no one would ever notice. They sold the HOA a bill of goods, and the HOA board was too arrogant to question it. I held the proof in my hands. The paper was old and brittle, but its legal power was undeniable. Karen and her board had built their gate on my family's land. A huge grin spread across my face. The game had just changed. It was time to stop defending and start attacking. With the legal proof tucked securely away, it was time to reclaim what was mine. I wasn't just going to ask them to take the gate down. I was going to remove it myself. I called up a buddy of mine who runs a construction company and explained the situation. He loved the story and was more than happy to loan me some equipment for the weekend. The next Saturday morning, at the crack of dawn, I rolled up to the HOA's precious gate, not in my pickup truck, but in a massive front-end loader. The roar of the diesel engine echoed through the quiet suburban streets. I could see curtains twitching in the houses nearby. I lowered the bucket, drove it straight into the flimsy aluminum gate, and with a satisfying crunch, tore it right off its hinges. I then pushed the mangled remains to the side of the road, clearing the path. But I wasn't done. My dad had left a bunch of old, heavy concrete barriers on the farm, the kind they use for road construction. Using the loader, I spent the next few hours hauling them over and strategically placing them. I didn't just reopen my road, I closed theirs. The path they had been using as a convenient shortcut through the edge of my property to another main road was now completely blocked. I put up my own signs, big, professionally made ones that read, "Private farm property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." By the time I was finished, Karen and a small, angry mob of her HOA disciples had gathered. They were screaming, threatening to call the police, filming me with their phones. Karen was practically purple with rage. I just smiled, tipped my hat and said, "Ma'am, I'm just securing my property line. You should be more careful about where you build your gates." Then I drove my loader right through the now open entrance and onto my farm, leaving them stranded and fuming behind a wall of concrete. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. The HOA, led by the furious Karen, immediately filed a lawsuit against me. They sued me for destruction of property, trespassing, and a whole list of other ridiculous charges. They filed for an emergency injunction to have my barriers removed. Their lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit, probably thought it was an easy win. He probably figured I was just some dumb farmer who didn't know any better. He was wrong. When we got to court, their lawyer presented the HOA's case, using their modern developer-drawn plat maps showing the road as part of their community. He painted me as a violent vandal who took the law into his own hands. Then it was my turn. My lawyer stood up and presented the original, century-old deeds and the legally recorded easement from 1925. He showed the judge the official county records that backed up our claim. The judge took one look at the evidence, then looked at the HOA's flimsy case. You could see the moment he realized what had happened. He didn't just dismiss their case. He lectured them. He told them they had performed an illegal land grab and that they were lucky I was uncountersuing them for damages and legal fees. Karen and the board sat there in stunned silence, their faces white as ghosts. The judge ruled that the road was, and always had been, the legal access for the farm, and that my barriers on my property line were perfectly legal. I walked out of that courthouse feeling 10 feet tall. I had not only saved my farm, but I had also defended my family's legacy. The farm is thriving now, and the HOA, well, they had to spend a fortune building a new, much longer road around my property. Every time I drive my tractor down my road, I give a little wave toward their neighborhood. I think it adds to their ambience. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.